I think that the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And so just being able to hold a hand out to a fellow human and say, you're not alone. I see that. I've been there. I've smelled it. Like, you can get past this. I think that that act is one of the most powerful things we can do. Even if no one else sees it, even if nothing comes of it, other than you have reached out in love to your fellow human being.
2-1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Way of El Marco. I'm your host, Marco Antonio Alvarez. Today, we have a very special guest, and I know I say that every time, but today I really mean it. Sorry, past other 8 episodes. No, I'm just kidding. But, but it is truly an honor to have a fellow Alvarez on the show today, and not just like another Alvarez out there, because there's a lot of us, but she's an actual family member. She's a cousin of mine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to episode number 9 with my guest, Emma Alvarez-Gibson.
Hello. I am so excited to be here.
Hola, prima, ¿cómo estás?
Pues bien, primo, ya ves. Ahí vamos, ¿verdad?
Sí,
Poco a
¿verdad?
poco.
So we just gave you guys, the people at home viewing we just guys gave you a little bit of the preview of this archetypal Mexican relative that we like to impersonate, because our family comes from Mezcala, right? And so for those who don't know where Mezcala is, it's in Jalisco, also known as Jalisco. Now, my cousin Emma, she is she's part of the, as I like to refer to, the Southern California Alvarez clan, while I am part of the Northern California Alvarez clan. So can you tell the story of how we first met?
Yeah, and before I do that, I just want to add one thing. The
Yeah.
main difference between the Southern and Northern California clans is that the Northern California people got into all the right businesses at the right time, and they all made a ton of money. And like the rest of us, poor schmucks, struggled forever. So
What?
sad.
Really?
Really.
We're going to talk about that one.
Yeah. So how did we meet? We met, it was actually through my brother. I think you guys had connected somehow on Facebook.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, there's this cousin of ours, which is a totally normal thing in a huge Mexican family because there's so many of us everywhere.
Right.
So I want to say you and I didn't meet until our mid 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And my brother and I drove out to see you at the premiere of one of your indie films.
Was it Barrio? It was Barrio.
It was Barrio.
That's right.
Yes. And he said, I think you guys have a lot in common. Like, I think he's really cool. I think you'll dig him. And I remember just feeling like, where have you been all my life? You're like my spiritual twin. And for me, I think the thing that was sort of like really drove the point home for me was I randomly mentioned something about, as a kid, seeing the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. And I said, yeah, I used to do what he did and in the movie and hold that penny in my hand and repeat to myself, like, it's 1914 or whatever year. And you were like, no way. So did I. And I thought, okay, this guy is my people.
I remember that.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, right. Totally. I remember that. Somewhere in Time. That was a fun film. I've always been fascinated by time travel. Right. I never read the book. Jules. I didn't read. I haven't read the Jules Verne book, but I did see the film Time Machine. Right. Mm-hmm. The original, and then of course the remake with Guy Pearce. Right?
Did not see it.
You did not see it. It's not bad. And so the thing is, let's travel back into time, and because with our family's history, I never got to meet my grandfather because of his crazy story, but I did get to meet your grandfather. Right. And so there's a couple of things that I find very interesting about you is that, number one, you're a writer. Right. and you're also a copywriter.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time I was like, what's the difference? And so I'm curious, like, can you help me understand the difference real quick? Like if someone in the audience right now is listening and they're going like, yeah, what is the difference?
Yeah. Contrary to popular belief, copywriting does not refer to uh, anything having to do with the law or copyrights.
Right. So why
Um,
do they call it that?
I mean, it's a difference in spelling, right? So it's copywriting as one
Oh,
word
with a W.
with a W. When you
Mm,
copyright something, you're probably not a copywriter. You're probably a lawyer or you're a business owner who needs to get something copyrighted. If you're a copywriter, it means that you are writing text, also called copy, for various business needs. So maybe it's a tagline, maybe it's an entire website, maybe it's a brochure, a poster, um, anything that helps businesses convey their message is considered copywriting.
okay. Gotcha. So it's business. Copywriting is, excuse me, copywriting is business writing.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it can be anything from, like I said, I just gave a couple of examples of like big to small. It's also sometimes just descriptions for clothing or
Mm-hmm.
descriptions on Amazon. That's all copyright.
So then here brings up this other question, right? We're kind of bouncing all over the place, but bear with me. So the advent of AI, right? When Chat GPT first made its debut, there was a bunch of people saying, "Oh, copywriters, watch out."
Eh, I think I'm not worried about it. Um, is it a job that a lot of people are doing, and is it an industry that is severely, overcrowded? Yes. Are there some people who are better at it than others? Yeah. Um, I think that if a business is choosing AI and it's serviceable for them, it's great.
Mhm.
But they're not going to get, I mean, I realize how this is going to come across, but they're not going to get the years of experience that somebody like me has. They're not going to get the nuance. They're not going to get the cultural connections. They're not going to get everything that comes with a human being. So I don't really, I'm not bothered by AI for people like me. It's a problem for artists, for visual artists, simply because the visual AIs, or I don't actually know what they're called, the art bots, um, they're actually stealing from what's out there, and so that's a whole other thing. But as far as a human skill that requires experience and thought and subtlety and precision, nah, that's not. That's that's 100, 200 years down the line, I think.
Yeah. Um, well, it's that whole there's this whole thing that's coming as far as like integrating with our technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in some way we already are when we have this thing on us at all times, or even like, well, cool, you got your phone in your lower extremities, so now let's put a little thing up here so you don't have to reach for your phone and you just do that,
Yeah,
right? And then now there's going to be talk about like augmented reality, like contact lenses that you can just like, right? And so
yeah,
that's going to be a funny day when you see people just like standing there going, you're like, oh, that dude's scrolling, right? Yeah, first, because it used to be like, I think that dude's having a stroke or some shit. Like, go help him, but now it's like, it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah.
there's something in your eye. Um, so you're saying 100, 200 years from now. Now, what I want to get into. So fair to say that copywriting is like the business version of storytelling,
Mhm.
right? Now you're a storyteller,
I am.
right? What kind of stories do you like?
There's a few. There's one book that has influenced me deeply. I think I read it when I was 6 or 7 for the first time, maybe a little younger. Um, and despite its title, it's a very serious book. It's called A Little Princess, and it's by Frances Hodgson Burnett. She's the same author who wrote The Secret Garden. And it's the story of this little girl whose father is a very wealthy British soldier. She's been raised in India by nannies who adore her. Of course, they adore her, right? Imperialism. She's very intelligent, kind of, beyond her years. She's very mature. She sees things that most kids don't really pick up on. And when it's time for her to start to become educated, her father drops her off at a boarding school in London, where everybody fawns all over her because, her father indulges her in a lot of things. He's young, he's a widower, he adores her, so he buys her everything that she wants. And she has this very strong code for herself where, people have referred to her as, oh, she looks like a little princess. She thinks she's a little princess. And the way she turns that around is by saying, I behave like a princess. She said, I've been very lucky. I don't know. She said, it's easy to behave like a princess when your life is easy. She said, I could turn out to be a horrible person if my life changes. And sure enough, her life changes. Her father dies, and it turns out that he's died penniless. And so she goes from being the star pupil of the school to being the scullery maid.
Mm.
And she fights with herself to keep this composure and to keep this kindness and to, this was written back when books for kids didn't hide kind of the agony and the horror
Oh, wow.
of life.
Wait, what year was that?
To be mistaken, I want to say it was about 1902-ish.
Okay. All right, cool.
Give or take 10 years on either side.
Sure.
And I just remember relating to her because things were tough at home. And B, about a couple of years ago, I picked up the book again because I still have the same copy I had.
Nice.
Kid. And I just sort of scanned through it, and as I'm turning the pages, I'm realizing, oh wow, there are things in here, there are aspects of her and of her story that I internalized so deeply that I didn't realize that's where they came from. So that's a story ultimately of, preservation, or sorry, not preservation, perseverance. It's two different words. I'm a copywriter. But it's Saturday, I'm off duty. It's a story of perseverance. It's a story of how remaining true to your beliefs and remaining committed to do what's right, committed to doing what's right, is ultimately the only road to take in life. So that's one type of story that I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm. I think that's oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's a really important point that you bring up right there with this, is that what the character says, I behave like X, whatever it is, right? It's that whole behavior of, if I want to be this thing, then I have to behave like this thing. I have to be it till I become it. I might not be royalty, whatever that means, just because my I forget who said it. I think it was maybe Robert Antoine Wilson. I think he said the reason why there were kingdoms set up because the thug gangs of Europe decided to stop fighting each other and go, okay, let's just make these our kingdoms and we'll just leave each other alone for a while.
Yeah.
Right. And I think even Alan Watts made a joke about, like, yeah, the guy who usually ends up being king is the one with the biggest gang anyways. So, right, whatever,
of course, yeah,
whatever, that whole idea of royalty. But I do want to get into this idea of behavior of someone to act a certain way. The word sovereignty, to be a sovereign, right, I think is a better word than royalty, right?
Yeah.
Because sovereign is someone who is in their own power. And so this character that you're mentioning, this girl, was in her own power and choosing to behave in a certain way to be an example to not just her schoolmates, but also to herself.
Yeah.
So stories like that are beautiful because it's just like, we need more of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think another story like that, another book like that I really love that carries a similar through line is My Side of the Mountain. Did you ever read that?
Mm-mm.
Also a kid's book from the 60s. And it's this kid who, he's like 13 years old and his parents have 11 kids. And they live in this tiny apartment in New York City. And he's like, you know what? I'm over this. He tells his parents he's going to run away to find the land that his granddad owned, which still belongs to the family, but nobody really thinks about it, whatever. So he gets out there and he reads up on all the wilderness survival stuff he can, and he gets out there and utterly fails for the first year. And he just keeps going. And I was really drawn to that kind of story as a kid, and I still am now, because I don't think that we take enough time to really acknowledge how much work it is to become your own person, to become sovereign. I think that's really critical. I think we need a lot more of that in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And that's, what does it entail to become sovereign? A big part of that is, detoxing from mass media,
Mm-hmm.
right? From that whole, programming, and even in some sense, public schools.
Yeah.
What's being taught in schools and stuff, and how kids are being taught, right? Where it's like, cool, you're going to be a good test taker, and we're going to groom you into being an amazing employee for somebody else.
Yeah.
We're not going to introduce critical thinking skills until you go to college, if you want to go to college. And then even then, that whole that whole brand is falling apart. It's overpriced and just
Ridiculous.
When you've got professors teaching classes on business and they've never run businesses themselves.
Problematic. Yeah. Yeah, right. I would agree.
It's I think the age that we're living in, where there's so much information available, just on YouTube alone,
mm-hmm.
right? Where you can just Google it. Like kids have such a different reality than what we did when we were their age. Now, granted, I think I just had the thought where I think life was a little bit less complicated for us in some regard.
It was smaller, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it was less complicated. I think it was smaller and narrower, and maybe some things were easier, but I think a lot of things were harder.
I think every generation is going to have its own set of hard, right? Yes. So, for example, I view a lot of our technological advancements as almost burdensome, mm-hmm. because of the addictive quality that they have. So, for example, I constantly struggle with decreasing my screen time with my phone.
Yeah.
Because of this balance that, you're creating art, content, branding, whatever you want to use, and you're getting that stuff out on socials. And then socials has got this addictive nature where next thing you know, you're like, oh.
Yeah. Stop. I can't think anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Because then it's really easy because this thing is, super mobile and it can go wherever you go, as opposed to like when we were kids, like the phone was tied to the wall.
Yeah. And you got bored and you had to think of stuff, and you had to think about what you believed, and you had to come up with ideas. And yeah, a lot of that involves discomfort.
How did you get into writing? How did you decide to, how did you find this and be like, I really enjoy this and I want to keep doing this?
This is, I hate when people give answers like this, but I'm going to do it.
Oh,
started when I was really little, from the time I learned to write. I loved stories. Um, I loved being able to express myself. I used to put books together and like, age 3, age 4, I would write books and draw a picture on the cover and tape the sides. And um, as I got older, it turned into a survival mechanism. And I used to write a lot of really terrible teenage poetry. I it was a way to explore. It was a way to explore what I was thinking, explore what I was seeing in the world. And a lot of times it was just a way to get my angst out and onto the page. Um, I say a lot to people that I think better with a pen in my hand, and I mean, it's true. I'm surprised I'm not holding one right now. I think better with a pen in my hand because I feel like it's at any moment I could jot down any idea, or I could scribble something that turns into something else. And it's a language unto itself. It relies on language, but it's its own language, I think.
That's really cool that you mentioned that, because it reminds me of some of the work that I've done in my men's group,
Mhm.
where a big part of this therapy for anger management, if you will, of better communication, of being able to mitigate my emotions, is journaling.
Yeah.
Right. And so the mechanism, the mechanism of anger is this: is that, when we're feeling like right now, we're reasoning with our frontal cortex, right, and we're having this conversation. Something were to happen that would either create fear or anger, then all of that energy and attention is going to go into my amygdala, and I'm right. And so the practice of actually starting to sit there and write
Yeah.
starts to help to re-engage the frontal cortex.
Yes. Um, I one thing that I heard consistently in school as a kid was how very, very wildly oversensitive I was.
Mm.
Teachers put that in my report cards. Kids said it to me. Adults said it to me. Um, it turns out I'm actually one of those highly sensitive people, which means I've got about 20% more nerve endings and synapses than most other people have in their nervous system. Um, which is to say, I have always found feelings incredibly overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, to your point, being able to sort of sublimate that into something is really fulfilling on a deep level.
I think it's necessary.
Yeah.
Um, I've had similar issues my whole life
Mhm.
with just experiencing emotions and just such intense levels, like they're just magnified.
Yeah.
Everything from from the quote unquote bad ones to the quote unquote good ones.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not kidding. I think it comes with the last name. I do.
You might be right. Our family's the Alvarez family is a little what, for lack of a better term, dramatic. I just lost you right there. What'd you say?
I said that covers it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good word right there. That would be a multi-part Lifetime films. I don't know. They probably aired on Lifetime, but it's been too. The Alvarez family's nuts, man.
I have this whole theory. And I recently shared this with another one of our cousins that you've never met. Um, I believe that the legacy of Los Altos, that region of Jalisco that we're from, the legacy of Los Altos is violence, right? So this is a group of people who left Spain during the Inquisition. Majority of them were crypto Jews by necessity. And by the way, a 12th grade aunt of ours. Yeah. Yeah, it goes through to you. I was just picturing the family tree in my head. Was burned at the stake in Spain for being Jewish. So that in itself is going to leave an indelible impression, right? And we know now that genetic memory is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens. People start leaving Spain for the New World. They cluster in this area. They're incredibly insular, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've got this legacy of fear with them, fear and persecution, and my God, having to leave the place that you were born, where everybody you've ever known is from, to a completely unknown place because of, oh gosh, you might get murdered otherwise. You
Right.
know, not that that's not an ongoing story for many people, but I'm just talking about that indelibility of fear and the need for survival. So they get there, they stick together for 400 years. We're all related in that town, by the way.
Yeah. Family Bush.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um, and so it's not really a surprise, particularly, and I'm only talking about the beginning of the 20th century when my grandfather was born. And I don't remember, was your grandfather older or younger than mine?
I don't remember.
I think he was younger for some reason. Um, so my grandfather was born in 1902. Excuse me. In the 20s, the government the government started outlawing religion.
Really?
Yes. So there was this
Oh,
whole civil war. Essentially, the president of Mexico at the time just was essentially sucking up to Russia. And
wow.
yeah, yeah. Hey, look what I'm doing. I'm just like you guys. Hello, fellow kids. So it became a huge problem, right? There was a whole civil war. My grandmother and her two first children were quarantined in one of those big houses in Tepatitlan being the closest city to Mezcala. And they have these huge houses there. And so they were quarantined, like 10 families to a house. Um, you can imagine the germs and, the tension and there's actually a movie that Andy Garcia was in about that whole war. And there's a gunfight featured in it that my grandmother would have been able to hear from the house where she was quarantined, which just blew my
Damn.
mind. Yeah. So there's just this constant violence, this constant persecution and heaviness, for lack of a better term. And, how does that, this is by no means a scientific exploration, but you and I have seen some of the direct results of that, right? Like, what did your grandfather do for a living for a while?
I heard he killed people.
He was an assassin.
Yeah.
And God, I mean, I can't even imagine in a town that small. It had to have been less than 500 people at the time, right? Um,
I remember one story of this was about Ramon going to take out two kids who were cattle rustlers. And he rolled up to the house and on his horse with his rifle out, and the mom was there, and he's like, "Where are your sons?" And you imagine she's just like, "Oh, dude, like, please don't kill my kids." And he's like, "Nope, sorry, I'm under orders." Boom, boom.
when you say kids, how old were they? Do you
I
know?
don't know. They were probably teenagers, but back in those days,
I mean, they were men,
at
right?
that point, yeah, right. At that
Yeah,
point, it's like, okay, cool. You got hair on your nuts. Here you go. Here's a gun,
yeah,
and here's a wife, and here's some land.
yeah,
Good luck, right?
yeah.
But think about how Ramon, how he died. So here's the thing, like the difference between two brothers, right? This is why I'm fascinated by our grandfathers. I had the honor of meeting your grandfather once. I'm so happy that I got to meet him, right? That I at least got to meet this other line of Alvarez that wasn't like Ramon. Not nothing against Ramon,
Right.
right?
I mean,
It
it definitely, the other side has its own, huge array of tragedy. But yes,
Of
I
course,
understand what you're
of
saying.
course. But what I'm saying is ultimately, like, one brother died, and while the other brother got to make it to be an old man,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And at least the story that I was told, that it was a Sunday that Ramon died. And if I recall correctly, I think your grandfather Cacho was a pious man, and so he would be in church
Yeah.
while his brother Ramon was at the bar playing cards, drinking with other cousins, and who soon became another rival because they found out as they were playing cards that they were both sleeping with the same woman.
I'm sure both were married as well.
Oh, they were very married, I'm sure, with many kids. And I'm sure they were drinking tequila. And then, as the story goes, the table flew up, and it was a little mini gun battle, and a couple of dudes got stabbed by Ramon, and I think Ramon
Wow.
accidentally killed one of his cousins because he was shooting dudes close range, and the bullet went through the first guy that was coming after him, and it killed one of his cousins. And so now there's all these dead dudes, and he's like last man standing. He runs out. Justo Ramirez is waiting for him up on a roof with a
That
German
name, though.
Mauser. Justo Ramirez, that name, I know.
Justo.
Justo.
Shit.
Justo.
Unbelievable. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, no, hey, but it goes back to this whole adage of, like, I'm a firm believer, like, the way you live is going to determine how you die. There's
Absolutely.
that saying about, you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword.
Yeah.
And I think that goes in so many different directions. And so Ramon, being the man that he was, like, no, in a lot of ways, like, no judgments, man. Because here's the thing, like, that's just how that story unfolds, right? Speaking of
Yeah.
stories, right? Speaking of stories, like, that's his story. That was his karma that he was living every day, and how his destiny was unfolding for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like from an outsider perspective, like, that shit was an action movie. And from an outsider's perspective, like, even from a distant relative being burned on the stake to then this whole family line coming to where they did, and I'm pretty sure they fucking killed a lot of indigenous people in the area
Oh, yeah.
to
No doubt.
claim the area. It's been like this. There's that ongoing joke about America going, like, geez, what's the matter with that place? It's like they built it over an Indian burial ground.
It's the darndest thing. Yeah. It's something you said kind of broke something loose in my brain. When you were talking about, when you said no judgment.
Mhm.
Um, life is really hard now when it's so easy.
Mhm.
Back then, um, would I want to be alive then as a woman? No. Do I judge people for living their lives the best way they can? No. You know, my oldest aunt, Lucia, some years ago, and so just for reference, she was my father's oldest sister. She was old enough to be his mom.
Oh, wow.
So she was telling us once about what it was like, when she was a girl in Mescala. And she said, there was so much violence all the time. She said, if you were out doing an errand and some man grabbed you and took you behind a building, you didn't tell your husband because your husband would kill him, and then his family would come and kill your husband, and then it would never end.
Jesus.
And I just thought, my God, I can't imagine the toll that took on all the women and all the girls. Just that aspect of it. That kind of stuff, it poisons you, and it poisons the bloodline, and it poisons everybody around you. And you know, back to what I was telling our cousin recently, when I was saying we have this legacy of violence, he goes, you're gonna laugh, but he goes, honestly, I think we're cursed. I said, I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. that kind of stuff is a curse. And, not to be cheesy, but it is absolutely up to each one of us to break it
Mhm.
and to find a new pattern and a new way of being, because nobody deserves this nonsense like funneled down generation after generation after generation.
So that's the work.
Yeah.
The work is to break the curse, to going back to the little princess and what she was doing
Yeah.
and how she was behaving because of the choice that she made to be a certain way, right? To be a
Yeah.
sovereign. And
Yes,
so then
absolutely.
that becomes our duty, especially as parents,
Especially as parents.
especially as parents who want something different for our children. Because when you speak of the curse, I spoke of the curse years ago when I was doing stand-up comedy.
Mm,
I had a bit, which I thought was hilarious. And keep in mind, like I had the whole San Francisco clan at this big show at the Purple Onion, right? And I
mhm.
was like, I can't wait to drop this Alvarez joke on their ass, right? And the joke was this. So the joke was this. So like, I start off with saying, so there's a family curse, right? And I was like, I'm gonna just tell you straight up, like when my father's father died, he was 12, and when my father died, I was 12. So if I ever have a son before he turns 12, I'm gonna be like, bro, you're adopted. And so
I didn't know that about your dad's dad.
I think that's the case. I'm not sure. You know how Mexican math gets a little jarbled over time, you
That's
know.
wild,
So I don't believe it. Right?
right?
It's just a joke. Once again, going back to breaking the curse. Because here's the thing. I don't think I'm gonna die of the same things my father died. Right? He was diabetic, didn't take care of himself. I don't think I'm gonna have a heart attack. I not right now, not anytime soon, not in the next 8 years, right? I don't think I'm gonna die a violent death like Ramon,
Yeah.
right? Like breaking those generational curses, whatever that thing is about the family. It's kind of like the same thing with any other group out there that accepts their fate because of their cultural and ethnic background,
Yes.
right?
And there is never any need to do that.
There isn't, right? So
Ever.
this is it's kind of like it's a very similar issue. So like one of my best friends, Rob, he's black. His dad was a African American Green Beret during the Vietnam War, and I always check in with him. I was like, dude, let me just back it up a little bit. Your dad was special forces during Vietnam, and he's African American. Like, holy crap! Like, how tough must that time for him
Cannot
be, right?
imagine.
And I check in with my buddy Rob about. I was like, so what do you think of like all these like like ghetto acting kids when they shouldn't be ghetto acting? And he's just like, dude, I hate it.
Yeah.
He's like, I hate it. And it's kind of like the same thing with like barrio ass acting kids.
Right. Like, what are you doing? That's not, that is not your cultural heritage.
Right, exactly. And you and I, for being the way we are, articulate and all that, then they make fun of us and call us, oh, you guys are just being very white. And it's just
Oh,
like,
why you talk like a white
why are
girl?
you talking white? And I'm like, okay, well, number one, that's insulting to my white friends. And number two, like
Well, and plus I actually am white. So okay, well, A, I'm part white, and B, I'm speaking English. I don't know.
it's
I
it
also speak Spanish without an accent. Do
yeah,
you?
yeah,
No.
that's the thing, right? So that's the thing. So like, so there's this, and this is just this really weird expectation that other folks within the culture put on other folks within the culture that you're supposed to be this way, and if you don't act that way, you're not. And then of course you know then it starts going into politics and starts going on to the other things, and it's just like, okay, we got to take it back to sovereignty.
Right, but it also
Hold on,
has
lost you again. There, you're back.
oh, sorry about that.
You're back.
It also has so much to do with, and I'm speaking specifically about Mexican culture here, right? I don't think I'm telling any stories out of school when I say there is an aspect to Mexican culture which is very much a learned helplessness, right? It's, well, it's out of my hands. I can't do anything. All I can do is laugh about it. There's so much political history tied into that. There's so much cultural history tied into that. Right. A country that is repeatedly invaded and taken over and demeaned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. You don't have to stay there, bro. You can decide to get up, even if it's only metaphorically, and be sovereign and be who you are. And not just say, well, these are the cards I got. Guess everything sucks.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way.
No, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. People can actually this even if you have a shitty hand, you can still win the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It's all about how you play that hand.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I'm a big believer that like you don't get to pick the cards you're handed, but after that, it is 100% on you to do whatever you're going to make of your life.
Here's something a little weird. Speaking of that,
Hmm.
so Alan Watts, one of my favorite philosophers, he's got this whole viewpoint that actually goes as far as saying that what if you actually did pick your cards? Right, just to get weird, right?
Mhm.
Like, because there's this whole idea where it's like, well, I didn't choose to be born into this world, but I'm going to ABC. I'm either going to own it or I'm going to be like, well, right? So there's the idea of like extreme ownership, radical acceptance.
Yeah.
Then Alan Watts, he, being influenced by Hinduism and stuff like that, he's mentioned in some of his talks where he was just like, one of my favorite line of his, where he says, "What if you were the evil gleam in your father's eye the night you were conceived?"
What a great line. Um, that is something that I think about a lot,
Mm,
actually. Um, and I mean, this implies a much larger plan than I think a lot of people are comfortable considering. Um, for me, I don't actually know what happens when you die or before you're born, right? Because I'm not there right now, but um, I'm happy to consider any story that's intriguing. And so that's an aspect that I do think about a lot. I think that it makes sense given that so often our weaknesses, our sorrows, our pain are where our strengths are. Um, and yeah, I mean, during darker moments, I think, man, I'm going to give myself a stern talking to after this life because, man. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. What if you did pick this scenario? What if you chose to, why did what if I chose to come into a family that is super broke, that in which I will end up getting a chronic illness at age 10, which has this massive history of violence on both sides of the family tree. Um, I think that as I get older, I start to see the fruits of the work I've done. Um, and I'm making this sound like it's some big, glorious thing, but I'm really just talking about working on myself and my relationships with others and with the world. Um, it's so amazing to be able to talk to somebody in a shitty situation that I happen to have firsthand experience with. I think that how you do small things is how you do all things. And ew, that rhymed. I didn't even mean that. Um, sorry, it got a little hallmarky in here for a second. Ooh.
oh man.
Shake that off. Um, I think that the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And so just being able to hold a hand out to a fellow human and say, you're not alone. I see that. I've been there. I've smelled it. Like, you can get past this. I think that that act is one of the most powerful things we can do. Even if no one else sees it, even if nothing comes of it, other than you have reached out in love to your fellow human being.
Well said, TC. Well said. Do you know it's been over 40 minutes at this point?
No,
Yeah.
I could go for like another 6 hours.
It's interesting once we get warmed up, right? And we start just going and going. Um, that has been a lovely episode. Thank you very much.
So much fun.
Yeah.
I deeply enjoyed it, and I would love to come back any point.
Oh yeah. No, we gotta do it again. We're just getting rolling because I think we're just breaking some really good ground there. That well, I think the next time we get together, I want to kind of tie it into the kind of work that we're doing to break generational curses, especially as parents,
Yes.
especially with your awesome son. But we'll talk about that
Thank you.
next. Oh, God damn.
Your son is no slouch himself.
Well, thank you. With that being said, dear cousin, we're gonna wrap up the show here. Ladies and gentlemen, oh, by the way, you have a podcast. Where can people find you? If you can give up that information, please.
You can find everything, including the podcast and other stuff that I've done at alvarezgibson.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of The Way of El Marco, episode number 9. Yeah, right there.
You did it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Subscribe till wherever the button's at. Tell everyone you know.
That like button.
Yeah, push that like button, like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you're going to be a dick about it, I'm going to find you. No, I'm just kidding.
He's Ramon's grandson, so look out.
That's true. It's been another one, ladies and gentlemen. See you later. Have a good night.